whenever we look at the past, there always has to be a logical, sensible reason why everything happened. But sometimes you come across an event where, however hard you try, you can't find a normal, sensible reason for it, which is why we call those events the paranormal. And I'm going to look at these phenomena in a really open-minded way to see if I can find out what the truth actually is. I'm working with Becky McCall. She's a science journalist. She's also very sceptical, which may help because we're investigating the case of Helen Duncan, an uncannily accurate wartime medium who became the last person to be jailed under the Witchcraft Act of 1735. Why were her claims taken so seriously that MI5 got involved? Was she really a threat to national security? Or were the ghosts of dead servicemen telling her secrets that she should never have known? When do you think the last time was that someone in the UK was put in prison for being a witch? The military were involved, the secret services, they were all paranoid. The whole country is on a war footing. And yet the powers that be are taking time out to try this woman, Helen Duncan, for witchcraft at the Old Bailey. We're talking 1944, so it's getting near D-Day. She was some kind of medium, some kind of psychic, apparently. She'd go into some sort of psychic trance at her seances, and she'd come out with stuff that she couldn't possibly have known and that were state secrets.
So she was at risk. They wanted her out of the way.
I don't know, maybe she really was a witch. In the 1930s and 40s, spiritualism was huge. There were mediums all over the place, but this Helen Duncan appears to have been such a threat to national security that they locked her up. Did military intelligence really believe she was communicating with the dead? Helen's granddaughter lives here in Edinburgh. She knew Helen and actually went to her seances. What sort of woman was she?
Large. Almost larger than life. When she walked into the room, she just seemed to dominate that whole room.
Do you remember the first time that you realised that she'd got some sort of special powers?
At 6, 7 years old, with his grandma going to sleep, then talking in strange voices. I was at 16. I was allowed to go to a proper séance and sit in.
What did you see?
I saw this coming up my grandma's nose and her mouth, and it gradually just went down over her chest.
What was it?
It was just white, dazzling white material.
What was she arrested for?
She was arrested as a spy and a traitor. But they had to change it, and they brought out this old Witchcraft Act from 1735 because she was giving out information about ships. One ship had been sunken. It was part of a convoy, and a German sub torpedoed it, and it went down with all hands. It was Hms Barnum.
What did you make of that?
Well, I thought some of the stuff was quite shocking, actually. I mean, these physical manifestations.
Yes, real things appearing in people's living rooms. And what about the ship?
Oh, the Barnum?
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
well, I mean, that's an event worth investigating, isn't it?
It certainly does sound as though security was involved in some way. If we really want to find out what happened to Helen Duncan, then I'm going to need to get much closer to the evidence. I'm on my way to Portsmouth, where she conducted a séance where the facts about HMS Barnum came out, and which ultimately led to her being condemned. This is where Helen Duncan did her séances when she came down to Portsmouth and Southsea.
Yes, this was a spiritualist church, in fact, over a chemist shop. This is where she came to do all her physical séances here in Portsmouth. And the room these were held in is in here.
Yeah.
And amazingly, there would be 30 people crammed in here in blackout conditions, hoping to see their loved ones and speak to their loved ones through her mediumship. She would sit on a chair over in that corner with a curtained recess, which spiritualists call a cabinet.
Here's Mrs. Duncan and the cabinet. It's extraordinary. It's just like a nice, cosy little room now, isn't it?
Absolutely. It was wartime. Here in Portsmouth, so many people had lost loved ones, and for them it was an opportunity, possibly, to see them again.
So how would she actually have conducted the seance?
She would have gone into a trance very quickly, and then the voice of Albert, her spirit guide, usually he acted as the master of ceremonies, and would speak to the sitters, and then spirits would begin coming out of the cabinet. Now, you have to remember that the lighting is very dim. There's a red light above the cabinet, and those that were at the back, in the back row, didn't get good view, but people that were close up said that they could recognise their loved ones, and that's how they communicated.
What happened on the night that she announced that the Barham had sunk?
As I understand it, what happened was a spirit came out of the cabinet.
Out of here, yeah.
Out of there. He gave his name as Sid, and he spoke to his mother. And I understand that he was wearing a hat with HMS Barham on it.
Over 60 years ago, there were maybe 35 people in this room when suddenly a spirit announces that this major British ship has been sunk, and no one could know that had happened, and it was top secret.
It was until that moment.
Was Helen Duncan mad, revealing a state secret in the middle of a world war? Because apparently, at that moment in 1941, the only people who knew the ship had gone down were those who saw it, and those people in that funny little upstairs room in Portsmouth. Did this Sid, who was apparently burnt to death on the Barham, really exist?
Look, I've been hunting through some old diaries from 1941 and found some interesting facts. Apparently, MI5 sent 2 officers to Portsmouth to investigate this Barham séance.
But did it really happen like that? Did the Barham séance really take place before the authorities released news of it? What have you got for us?
Well, to start with, there's this document here which lists the naval gains and losses.
November and December 1941, gains and losses of larger ships do not take into account the loss of HMS Barham.
Exactly. And the announcement officially, according to the newspaper, The Times, was in February.
Casualties in HMS Barham. So that's 3 months after the Navy knew that it had sunk before it appeared in the Times.
And then the MI5 officer, Guy Liddell.
Yeah.
And he actually makes a mention of this. Let's have a look. Here we are. The Barham case has come up once more. The medium produced a drowned sailor.
Called Sid, which is the name that Roy told me this morning. It says he was recognised by several people present at the séance who said he was one of the crew.
The Sydney that apparently appeared was a petty officer. So we have his name, it's a Sydney. We know he's a petty officer.
We know he was on the Barham.
We know he was on the Barham. So I went to the Barham website, and this lists all the petty officers.
So we've got Sydney Fryer, Sydney Plaskett and Sydney Bruty.
Which of the 3 is likely to be our drowned sailor? I looked at the details of their addresses, where they came from, and one actually came from Copnall.
It was Copner Road where the séance took place. Is that just a coincidence? Or could this man be our dead sailor?
OK, here. Fryer, SA, Sydney, 1941, Stoker Petty Officer.
So many names.
Yeah, 800.
800 on the Barham.
800 died.
It's good work you've done today.
Well, it's coming together slowly.
Yes, isn't it? So what do we do now?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I'd like to know why so many people believed in this Helen Duncan, and, well, if she wasn't talking to the dead, then what other explanation is there?
But I have to say, séances themselves are completely out of my comfort zone.
Me too.
I'm going to go to a séance. It now seems pretty clear that the announcement by the medium Helen Duncan that HMS Barnum had sunk during the Second World War wasn't a myth. We know a séance took place, and we think that the actual spirit that gave the announcement belonged to a chap called Sidney Fryer, who was a petty officer who died on the Barham. But what actually took place at the séance itself, we're much less clear about, which is why I'm now going to a spiritualist church in Havant, near Portsmouth, provided I can find it. You don't often see séances anymore like Helen Duncan's in 1941, but there are still places like spiritualist churches where people try to communicate with the dead.
And why communication happens is because there is a connection of love that exists between you and that person that's passed to the spirit world. And so what I would say to you tonight, friends, is just to remain open and also remember to use your voice, okay? Thank you, I'm ready to start. Thank you very much. I can hear in my mind here what sounds like metal crunching, so I know that there was some kind of a collision here. I feel like I'm in the middle area, my darling, the ladies in the blue. I just get this very strong emotion from this gentleman, and I know that as I talk about him that there was such a suddenness that he's just said to me he couldn't, I will tell him, matey, he's just said I couldn't stay in control.
He lost control of the car and went into a Rowlands and the thing went through his eye.
Oh, God love him. I just could hear metal crashing, that's what it sounded like as he came very close to me. And I just know that he's drawing me to you, my darling, so I know that there's a link that you have to this young guy, because he's making me want him to talk to you and say to you, will you please tell her that the dream was real? So there's something here about a dream that you've had. Does that make sense? You've questioned its authenticity in some respects, but he's telling me the dream was real. He's standing now just next to you, my darling, okay? And I know that this part of his chest was the issue, and I know that there was certainly this sense of him having what feels like, again, a lung disease, almost like emphysema. There's a sense of him feeling like his lungs had filled up with fluid here. Does that make sense to you? And he's making me very conscious again that first time round, he didn't pay much attention, he's just said, okay?
Never did.
He never did. God love him, okay?
It's got me confused. One minute he seems to know everything, and the next he's clutching at straws.
Does that make sense to anybody at all? Okay, don't shout, thank you. See, this I can hear you, mate, but I can't do any more. Okay, don't do that to me. Good. Okay then, Mary, come on, you tell me who you belong to. I need to talk to a lady, please, who's a hairdresser. She wants to talk to the hairdresser. And I feel that the lady I want to talk to actually would have done this lady's hair.
I'm a hairdresser.
Would you understand, please, who Mary Fox would have been, my love?
No, I don't think so.
It doesn't feel right somehow, but thank you anyway. I normally get a pull when it's right, and I was drawn across here, but I'm not sure. I'm hearing an Irish accent, an Irish gentleman's voice, and I feel like I want to talk about somebody's dad who's Irish.
That's my father.
That's yours, my darling, lovely, okay. Can I speak to you, because I'm just very aware of this man. Without being unkind to it, is the kind of guy that if he didn't get listened to, he'd just get louder.
Yes.
Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
Because he's lovely. As I'm talking to you, Madame, please, he has with him a little boy in the spirit world here as well. That I want to
My
connect.
son.
Your son. Oh, don't tell me. I was going to tell you. Right. Because I've got to say, it's your boy that's here, and I know that your boy's here very clearly, and I'm very conscious to say to you that he's with your dad. He's with your dad, okay? And I want you not to worry about either of them because they're taking care of each other. I need to say, Madame, that it's very important that you understand that had your boy physically lived, he would have needed an awful lot more care than you would have been able to provide alone. Would that make sense to you? And I'm very aware to say to you that your boy absolutely is growing up with you in the spirit world, and I don't need to worry about him, okay? I also can hear him saying to me that you released a balloon.
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, my darling.
A little hut in Havant on a Tuesday evening, and it's full of people convinced they're hearing from their dead relatives. But is it for real? Some of the things the medium told them, little specific details, can he really be faking all of them? But if all this speaking to the dead business isn't for real, why would Helen turn up here in the middle of the war when Portsmouth was being bombed night after night? Well, she'd certainly have known she'd find people desperate for news about their menfolk. This big star arrives, the lights are dimmed, everyone's waiting with bated breath for a sign, a message, anything. But what she revealed was the closely guarded secret that the Barham had been sunk. So, is this proof that she was talking to the dead? Darren, who's the medium from last night, is giving me a private reading. I'm probably a bit more sceptical than the people in Havant. So can he convince me he's in communication with my dead relatives?
Can I just take your hand for a second just to make a connection with you? And just as I'm doing this, I'm asking your loved ones to come close and to give you what it is they feel that you need. Thank you very much. Just as I'm connecting that, I want to just say that I'm very conscious of a gentleman stepping forward, a very tall guy, I'd say 6 foot, 6'1", quite slim in his build here. I'm aware that as I talk about him, I'm getting palpitations, and I know that he remembers having some kind of heart condition that I feel before he passed to the spirit world took him very, very quickly, but there was like a heart condition or a heart disease. Does that make sense to you?
Most of the men in my family were actually quite little.
Okay.
The only one that I can think of that was tall was my paternal grandfather.
Okay. Now, can I say that there's a link to this man either owning or working in a pub, because he keeps taking me into a public house as though he's got a great memory of propping up the bar in this public house.
There was a pub right over the road from where he lived.
Okay.
Just opposite the shop.
Why would he talk about somebody called Mary doing a good job? Because he's talking about a lady called Mary that I feel is in this world, actually, not passed over. Now, I've got to say this to you, that I'm seeing 2 children here as well, that there's a boy and there's a girl that I can sense here that link to Mary, and I get a very strong link that Mary lives away from me, that there's a distance somehow, quite a distance here.
That's absolutely spot on.
Mary... I'm sorry, I'm on a flow, okay? Right. There's also a link here to the name of Shepherd that's very significant, because I'm hearing him calling the name Shepherd. Is that relevant?
Mary Shepherd is the mother of my 2 children.
Oh, okay. Right.
One boy and one girl. There was something about the reading that didn't sit right with me. When he came up with the name Mary, I thought, oh, wow, yes, that's the mum of my kids. But then when he came up with her surname as well, it just felt to me like he'd Googled some site.
It's okay, I hear you, thank you. Your lady here is making me very conscious of the month of August, and she keeps asking me to talk about the 16th of August, as though that there's a significant anniversary around that date.
My birthday's the 15th of August.
That'll do, okay then.
There were actually things, when I said no, I don't have any knowledge of what you're talking about, that in retrospect I did.
I will tell him, thank you. Have you been sanding some floors? Because he's talking about floors being sanded here. I get this sense of a floor that's been sanded.
I don't know why I didn't think of it at the moment. I've been waiting to get my floor sanded for months.
See, there's something here about the fact that we've not been able to find a headstone, or not been able to find a grave, or not been able to find a resting place for a member of your family. Who is Anne, please?
Anne.
And this is a name I'm hearing from the spirit world rather than this world.
Anne. I'm completely split down the middle, because the part of me that was sceptical before I had that reading thinks, yeah, cha.
And this might sound very, very silly, but there's been an issue with one of your ceilings where you live.
Yes.
Because he's laughing about this issue with the ceiling.
The other part of me thinks, wow, if it's true, he's just found things that are so accurate to the person that I am. I wonder how I would have felt back in 1941 in Portsmouth if I'd heard Helen Duncan saying the Barnum had been sunk. Would that have confused me too?
I'm sure there's another explanation for what people experienced that night. I want to unlock the psychology of a séance.
What we're doing today, we've got a number of volunteers. They've all given an object in, and they think they're going to get a psychic reading based on that object.
What we're going to see in their response to the reading is something called the Barnum Effect.
If I hand out the readings now, get your opinion on them. But it's a scientific study, so can you try and keep them to yourself? Don't discuss them as yet, you can discuss them later on. Go ahead, take a look.
There are certain kinds of statement that are either kind of very general or vague or ambiguous, but virtually all of us accept them as being descriptive of our own unique personalities.
If you want to read through again, when you're answering the questions, please feel free. It's a scale of 1 to 7.
At times you're extroverted, affable and sociable, while at other times you're introverted, wary and reserved. So when you put a whole bunch of these statements together, that sounds like a really accurate reading to people. But in fact, pretty much anybody would actually accept that reading as being accurate and very specific.
They're marking it out of 7 Of course, what they don't know is they've all got the same reading.
How accurate was the reading as a description of your unique personality? So for you?
6, I said.
6.
6.
6.
6.
Yep.
A 5 or a 6.
6.
I said 6 as well.
It's actually worked. I can't believe it. They're convinced by this.
Absolutely. I mean, I've seen this so many times. It's a really reliable effect.
Okay, just reading out a couple then. Taking the first one top. You have a great need for other people to like and admire you. You have a tendency to be critical of yourself. You have a great deal of unused capacity which you've not used to your advantage. And while you have some personality weaknesses, you're generally able to compensate for them. Does anybody just put your hand up if you recognise that? So that's all of you. Okay.
I'm not saying that all psychics are deliberate frauds. There is a technique called cold reading. Called cold reading because you've just met this person from cold, never met them before, and you do a reading for them, and they're blown away by it. They say, wow, that's incredible. How do you know all those things? It's amazing. Now, part of cold reading relies on the Barnum Effect, relies on these kind of statements. Beyond that, I would also make use of any body language cues I could pick up on. If you were showing interest, if you were leaning forward, then, OK, this is something that means something to you, this is significant. But a lot of cold reading is about the use of language. So very often, when you watch psychics in action, you realise they ask an awful lot of questions rather than making statements. Now, the way they ask the questions is interesting. Like, were they a happy person? And if you answer yes, I'll say, yes, I thought so. I can see them there now smiling, always enjoyed a good joke, you know. If you said,
searching, aren't you?
Exactly. If you said no, I'd say, no, I sense a deep sadness there, you know. And which, however you answer it, I'll pretend I already knew that. You're just confirming what I already knew.
How could that fit into what went on the Barham night?
One possibility in the Barham case was Helen said that she saw a sailor, or this sailor materialised and a ship's gone down, and some woman in the audience recognised, or this rang a bell with her, and she sort of stood up and said, yes, my son's a sailor, I think it's the Barham that's gone down. So she was primed, if you like, and of course Helen then confirmed that.
In which case it wouldn't have been Helen Duncan who was aware that the Barham had sunk, but this other woman.
Yes, in that case that was cold reading. Now another alternative is hot reading.
Which is?
In hot reading, it's simply a case that the medium has done her homework. She's done the research. She knows the facts.
But that couldn't have happened in this case, though, could it? Because the Barham sunk in 1941, but it wasn't until 1942 that it was announced.
Well, that's where you might be wrong. 1942 that it was officially announced publicly. But I have some letters here. Now, these letters are written from the Admiralty to parents of some of the sons that died.
Yeah.
And these letters were dated December 41. And in the letters, here, you'll see that they tell them that their son died, and they've asked them to be quiet about it. You should not communicate this sad news to any but your immediate relatives. So people knew about this. Now, we don't know if the séance occurred after the 6th of December or before the 6th of December, but there's a possibility here that this is where the information came from.
And if Helen had known that, then she could have fed it to the audience.
Precisely. Two down-to-earth explanations, two possibilities.
But it's not either or, is it? It could be hot reading, it could have been cold reading, but it could have been spirits. It doesn't take us that much further. This is a bit of a bombshell. It seems that there were people who knew about the sinking of the Barham before the séance, and if that's true, then maybe Helen knew about it herself. It's not conclusive, but it's a plausible explanation. But it doesn't tell us much about Helen herself, or the ghosts that seem to surround her. I must have done this journey 50 times before, but I always thought that it was a dead end. I didn't realise that there was a little road beyond it, a secret mystery road like something out of a spooky movie. And just like in a spooky movie, I'm going to a college for mediums and psychics. What exactly is it that you do here?
It's a college. It was for training for mediumship. Mental mediumship for communication with the spirit world, healing mediumship, We're the Spiritualist National Union. It's what we do. Mediumship is a core practice of our religion, so that we can provide evidence to support our beliefs that life is continuous.
This place looks a bit like a grown-up Hogwarts, but it's a place where they use science to try to prove psychic phenomena actually exist.
These are plaster casts of materialised hands, very delicate.
Can I touch it?
Yeah. Hope you're insured, because we can't reproduce them at the moment. What would happen? The spirit person would materialise the hands. You can see the way they're interlinked fingers.
Yeah.
They'd have a bucket of paraffin wax, liquid paraffin, and keep dipping the hands in and out, forming a mould around them, and then the hands would dematerialise once the wax is set.
So the cast would still be there?
That's right. Pour in plaster of Paris, you've then got a model of a dead person's hands.
It is hard to see how if someone's hand had been inside that,
yeah,
it wouldn't have broken the cast when it was trying to get out. There is a great suspicion that some of the work that Helen did was...
There's a great suspicion on all of this and all of the mediums, not just Helen, simply because for anyone who's not seen it, it's too fantastic to be true, so it must be fraud. Seeing is believing.
Are you saying that you don't think that any of the things that Helen produced were fake?
No, I'm not saying that. But I spoke to a lady some years ago who was at the last Helen Duncan séance. She was a nurse and she did the body search, a full cavity search prior to the séance. You look at the volumes of ectoplasm that are produced and people say she used to swallow it and regurgitate it. Have you ever tried swallowing a handkerchief and bringing it back, let alone material the size of a bed sheet?
What's ectoplasm?
It's a substance that's extruded from out of the medium's body. Quite common is the mouth, the nose, eyes, ears, even under the fingernails. It can appear as very thin, wispy smoke. It can condense into clouds and even then condense into the human form.
Becky, all the mediums that I've talked to agree that fraud has been known to take place. Even some of the most respected mediums have probably committed fraud, but it's tended to be when they're under pressure, like Helen Duncan was. But they say that this allegation that ectoplasm is phony and that mediums just secrete it about their body and then eject it during a séance doesn't stack up, because there is so much of the stuff. There won't be anywhere to put it. And anyway, a lot of mediums, including Helen Duncan, often had full cavity searches before they started their séance. And they say that even if, by some stretch of the imagination, they were able to secrete it, what would they do with it at the end of the séance? Because at the end of the séance, it just kind of disappears, it vaporises. So what are they going to do with it?
I want to know how she could have engineered these physical seances. How did she do it? I need to find someone who can help me with a scientific way of looking at it.
While you're doing that, these are the objects that we're going to use.
So they all seem to have luminous strips on them. How dark is it actually going to be?
It's going to be extremely dark, so if we've got it right, you won't be able to see your hand in front of your face.
So I'll go and tell Tony he's going to experience a Victorian séance and leave it at that.
Reconstruction of a séance, he's playing the role of a sitter. Be perfect. Thank you very much for coming along today. Hopefully you're going to have an interesting experience. What we're going to do is a reconstruction of a Victorian darkroom séance and try and contact the spirit of a musical singer from around the turn of the last century, a woman called Marie Ambrose. What we have on the table here are various objects which she would have been familiar with. If everyone can just hold hands, that's fantastic. Very, very good. The important thing is that when we are in total darkness, don't let go of the person next to you, OK? Whatever happens, hold on to their hand, OK? If you do become scared, and I hope you do, then just squeeze the hand of the person next to you, and they will be there for you, OK? Excellent, OK? In which case, if we can take the room into complete darkness. Very good. What I want everyone to do is to work as a group to transform from a group of individuals into a single group that's going to work together. Everyone, I want you now to open up your minds, open up your hearts to the spirit of Marie. Imagine her joining us now. Imagine Marie coming forward now. Open up your mind, open up your heart. Excellent, that's good, that's good. Stay with it now. Imagine her joining us, joining us now. That's good. Okay, imagine Marie with us now. That's good. Okay, stay with it as a group. Okay, okay, that's fine, that's all right. So imagine her spirit going back into the spirit world. That's good. We can bring the lights back up. Excellent, that's good. If you can break contact around. Very good.
I'm now going to properly introduce you to your medium. This is Richard Wiseman,
Hello
Professor of Psychology.
Hello.
Good to see you. This is us in the darkness here. So that shadowy figure in the background is Sarah, who very kindly helped us out.
You know, I was actually listening to see if there was anybody there. I couldn't hear anybody at all.
And that's part of the psychology. People think that if somebody came in like that, that they'd actually notice it.
Yeah,
but actually, most people don't. So Sarah's got a very, very difficult job.
Yeah.
She's got to find those objects in total darkness.
Of course, yes, she's in darkness too.
Yeah, so she can't see anything. So as soon as she's got the stick under the maraca, she'll squeeze me on the shoulder, and I know that's the cue to put everyone's attention onto the maraca. Imagine her joining us. And what she will do is flick it into one of the sitters' laps.
Yeah, I've just seen it.
Right,
yeah.
okay.
It's so pathetically obvious.
Yeah.
It's so hard to believe, seeing that we wouldn't be completely aware of it. But we weren't at all. It was a black room, it was pitch dark, it was absolutely quiet. And the things move.
And the things move. That's good. That's good. Okay. Stay with it. It's about role-playing. You're in the role of a sitter. It's your job to believe this, to have a good time, to be open to the spirits and so on. Okay. You know, when we've done these experiments, we know about 1 in 5 people think that the spirits were there and it was a genuine séance. So it's a good reason when we read these accounts, these amazing things happening with the Helen Duncan séances or others, you know, to be sceptical, to think that maybe some of this stuff just didn't happen at all.
It's easy to be sceptical about these phenomena, but people who were there had a very different view. You are the only person that we've been able to find who ever went to a Helen Duncan séance.
Well, she did quite a number of sittings, but of course, you see, I was young comparatively for people that usually went. I was 23.
And Helen Duncan was already there when you arrived?
She was brought into the room, having been physically examined. They even do an internal examination sometimes because a lot can be secreted within the body. And then she was brought in having been, I think, sewn into a very loose-fitting and yet completely closed black robe. And it was a red light, which when you get accustomed to it, you can see the features and expressions of somebody sitting 5-6 feet across the room from you. At certain stages, curtains were drawn across, which of course does tend to give people the idea there's a lot of hanky-panky going on. There was a quite distinguishable smell with ectoplasm. Quite distinguishable.
Like what?
It's rather like bodily semen or that sort of smell. Not unpleasant, but not one that one would expect to have around the room, but very strong. And then this ectoplasm, as I say, snaked across the floor and came up really between us. There appeared the face of a man, short hair, and suddenly one of these blobs, as it were, being almost thrown on, formed a fairly large moustache. I said, "Oh, moustache!" It was a silly thing, but you know.
You knew who it was?
I knew, yes, from immediately recognisable, as I would recognise you. He was very cross with me for only commenting about the moustache and chided me as if You know, if that's all you've got to say, all very military. And...
Did he look dead?
Well, I suppose if you thought of it, yes. But well, his face was animated and speaking. And after 2 or 3 little interchanges, nothing of great import, I'm bound to say, he disintegrated, collapsed at our feet, and withdrawn into the medium, right across the floor.
Does sound in many ways quite implausible, doesn't it?
It does indeed, I quite agree. I'd sympathise with anybody who disbelieved me and think they had a stronger case in a way. It's only when you've had personal experience you have to reconsider and realise that such odd things can happen. I was 100% satisfied then, and I'm 100% satisfied now that what we saw that evening was genuine.
What Denise witnessed wasn't anything like those tricks in the lab. Producing ectoplasm and entire people, it's an entirely different league. So how could the scientists ignore that kind of evidence? What about Helen Duncan? Was she a fraud?
I think she was fraudulent. Was she doing what we were doing this morning? Well, kind of. It's the sitters that are doing a lot of the work. You know, they're seeing an eerie shape or a little bit of movement, and they're amplifying that in their mind, and it's becoming this incredible spiritual adventure for them.
And they weren't just seeing apparitions, though. They were seeing ectoplasm, weren't they? This mysterious, half-spirit, half-natural world stuff in which these spirits express themselves.
There was a guy called Harry Price who was a respected investigator at the time.
Price is fantastic. He's one of my heroes, actually, in the whole field. He did all these kind of colourful investigations.
He would check the nose, the ears, he would check, obviously, the throat, the mouth.
This is Helen Duncan. He would check her before she started.
Helen Duncan, before the seance and after the seance, just to check if she was harbouring anything that could have been regurgitated or produced during the session. But
it's a bit of a mystery, isn't it? I mean, he even had a gynaecologist and someone who looked up people's bottoms there.
That was Price's theory, that somehow she was bringing this stuff up during the seance, but he sort of backed away from that in later years.
How much of it would there have been?
For some of her larger materialisations, this is kind of roughly the size we're looking at. So lots of the time, a lot less than that.
It's a lot to sit down, isn't it?
But when she was materialising people, it would have had to have been this
roughly that size.
How on earth could you hide all of that on your person if you'd been searched by a gynaecologist? I mean, I know she was a big woman. She might have been able to tuck bits of it away in roly-poliness, but not that much.
Yeah, apparently she had suits as well. This Harry Price would actually sew her into a suit after the search, so she couldn't actually store anything after.
Well, I think you need to look very closely at the records, because often when it's very well controlled, it's only small strips that are appearing, and that could be in all sorts of places. Price also talks about nosebleeds and so on during the seances. When it's this size, though, you're talking about, you know, it going somewhere inside her body, or there being the use of accomplices that maybe pass it to her, and so on. And that all gets down to what were the controls, you know, who were the eyewitnesses, and were they really reliable?
Nevertheless, this Harry Price used scientific methods, your kind of stuff, in order to scrutinise what was going on. He took photos, he made records, he did body searches, he sewed her into a suit, and even if it was only cheesecloth, he still had no idea how it actually was produced.
Take a look at these photos of Helen Duncan.
I'd kind of forgotten that we were talking about a woman. She'd been reduced to a specimen.
She was all woman. She had 20 stone of her.
Yeah.
She had 6 children. She had an invalid husband. So it was all very real.
Very sensitive eyes. But as far as you're concerned, a complete fraud.
Well, I mean, look at the facts. We've examined the Barnum case. We looked at the whole idea, mental mediumship, physical mediumship. Perhaps it was the hot and cold readings. I showed you how you can move objects around a room in the dark and make it look like it's real.
Yeah, I don't doubt that she used dodgy tricks. You don't have to persuade me of that. This one photo speaks volumes, doesn't it? I mean, how could that be anything else other than a total travesty? But maybe she was a mixed medium. Maybe she used that kind of theatrical device in order to pull people in, to get them into the drama of the moment. And then she used maybe psychic powers, maybe just psychological insights in order to give people messages.
You know, it wasn't as if she was advertising herself as a piece of theatre or a piece of pantomime. She was saying she was receiving messages from the other side. She wasn't. She was a fraud.
OK, Becky's mind's made up. But what about Denise? Would she really have been fooled by a bit of cheesecloth? Hang on, I'll be with you in a sec. Hello? You think this investigation's over, don't you?
Yeah, I do, well and truly.
Well, you're wrong. But there's another story.
Oh, Tony, I thought we'd nailed this.
No, we've nailed the fact that when Helen Duncan announced the sinking of HMS Barnum, she was using at least some fraudulent devices. But apparently that wasn't the only sinking that she announced. And if this new story is right, it would explain why both the government and the Secret Services were so frightened of her. It's another séance earlier in 1941. Helen Duncan announces the loss of another ship, this time HMS Hood. This surely was the moment when, as far as the security services were concerned, Helen became a marked woman. The head of British military intelligence in Scotland, Brigadier Firebrace, was at the séance. And we're on our way to meet the woman who worked with him for 20 years. This is a magazine from January 1959. It's an interview with a Brigadier Firebrace,
yes,
where he says, during the war, I was head of intelligence in Scotland,
right,
and I had the opportunity of attending a séance with Mrs. Duncan in Edinburgh.
Tragedy. HMS Hood is sunk and all the men are sunk. Something like that. Left the séance, couldn't wait to get back to a telephone to ring the Admiralty to tell him what he'd heard, that Hood has gone down. And they said, rubbish. No such thing. No. Wrong.
He got another telephone call back from the Admiralty?
Yes. Not then, but 2 days later.
And what did they say?
She's quite right. All is lost.
You don't think there is any way that either the Brigadier or Helen Duncan could have known that the Hood was about to sink?
Quite impossible. Quite impossible.
The Barham story might be open to question, but the Hood's different. Hundreds of miles out to sea, the Hood goes down with over 1,400 men. The authorities don't know, the Admiralty itself doesn't know, but Helen seems to know. Her fate was sealed. In the run-up to D-Day, the biggest secret of the whole war, there was no way they could risk another revelation. Helen was arrested, and eyewitnesses at her trial claimed that what happened next was less like justice and more like a show trial.
It was a very sensational case. It was getting in headlines in the newspapers, and she was being prosecuted under this Witchcraft Act, which seemed rather extraordinary to most people who'd never heard of the Witchcraft Act. She was charged for pretending to conjure spirits, which is the wording of the Act.
What was it like in the courtroom?
The witnesses were so extraordinary.
In what way?
Well, there were a very large number of witnesses for the defence who were called one after the other and described the most extraordinary things that had happened at the seances with Mrs. Duncan, which they had personally witnessed. You couldn't imagine that a person who was fraudulent could have done all this. I remember one particularly, a nurse called Nurse Rust, who was a midwife and who was extremely insistent that she had been confronted with her husband, whom she recognised.
I said, "Is it you, Daddy?" meaning my husband. And he said yes. I invited him out and said, "Come out, dear." I immediately got up from my seat, went right up to him and I said, "Kiss me, dear."
There's something terribly tender about that. As soon as he appears, there's that intimacy of come out, give us a kiss.
Well, it does suggest that she was completely convinced herself.
There's a bit here from the wing commander where the QC says, "Your mother materialised and you spoke to her." "I did, sir." "How close did you get to her? Were you satisfied it was your mother?" "Yes, I was in the second row of chairs. I stood up and leant over to get as near as I could without disturbing people in front of me. A man knows his mother." all these witnesses, and yet it didn't take the jury very long to come to a decision.
Yes, and I found that rather strange, that they could so readily dismiss all this. And I think they could only do so as, I suppose, what one might almost call prejudice against the whole idea. And I think that the jury in the end believed the seemingly common sense assertions of the police rather than the extraordinary assertions of all these spiritualist witnesses.
The irony of this whole case, to me, is that those people who saw what she did believed her. Those people, by and large, who didn't see what she did were profoundly sceptical. But then, when she offered to give a demonstration of her powers in front of the court, she was turned down first by the judge and then by the foreman of the jury. So she didn't have any chance to prove that what she was doing was real. So the authorities got Helen out of the way. They put her in prison for an unprecedented 9 months, from which she never really recovered. Which is the house where she lived at the end of her life?
Number 36, the one with the black door. Yeah. She was just hounded from she was convicted in 1944 till then.
Medium grabbed and searched after cabinets torn down. She was ready again.
Yes, in 1956. There was a séance going on, and halfway through, the police burst the door open. They manhandled her. They touched her body. She had burns on her body. That was it. The end was very painful, very painful. And she came back in November, and she was dead by the 6th of December.
It does seem like she was treated pretty badly in her life.
I think so, yes. Especially after the trial. To this day, I still feel very resentful. Not so much of the trial, the actual reason for it, witchcraft, when I know she was anything but a witch.
Do you feel your grandma is still looking after you?
My grandma's looked after me since the day she died. She looks after all of us.
As far as the family are concerned, it's an open and shut case. The authorities hounded Helen Duncan to death for her wartime revelations. I'm sure she used trickery sometimes, but there are things she did I don't think we can explain away so easily. I still don't know whether she was put in prison because she was a witch, or because she was a fraud, or just because she was a harmless old woman who didn't understand what state secrets were all about.
Well, I tend to think it was probably a bit of each, really, but overall, I suppose she was seen as a threat to national security.
Maybe, but I wish I could have attended one of her séances. I think then I'd have known what I really thought.
Join Tony again tomorrow night at 9 when he investigates claims of a strange communication with dead monks in The Ghosts of Glastonbury. A remarkable tale tonight at 11:10 on 4 in The Eternity Man, contemporary opera filmed by Julian Temple. While next,